Hello, hopefully everybody can hear me. It sounds like you might be struggling. I'm Jackie Cooney. I'm the Senior Director of Privacy and Cybersecurity at Paul Meetings, which is a law firm. I'm a attorney by background. My job is to help companies to operationalize and implement privacy and cybersecurity requirements, deal with privacy and cybersecurity risks, and come up with effective and reasonable practical solutions to privacy and cybersecurity problems. So that is why I'm here today to moderate this panel on how to deal with cybersecurity risks, which is a very broad topic. But luckily for all of us, I am joined here by a panel of experts who have a lot of experience in this area. So I'll just introduce them quickly going down the line, and then I'll kind of introduce the topic. The way that we're handling this session is to do kind of a question and answer. So I'll tee up questions and let the group kind of discuss different topics that we think will be interesting to you. So to my left is Ashton Fine, who's a partner and vice chair of the Global Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice at Covington and Burling. Then we have Yuichi Ikeda, who is a partner at PwC. And then we have David Meadows, who's Senior Managing Director at FTI Consulting. We have Mike Hollander, who is the Associate General Counsel for Cybersecurity Law at Meta. And but not least, Takeshi Hayakawa, did I do okay? Attorney at Nagashima, Ono, and Tsunematsu. And so, we have had some pre-meetings, and I will say this group has a lot of incredibly good background and experience that I think you'll find interesting. So to tee up our topic, so companies, they can be global, they can be local, they can operate in all kinds of markets. They have electronic data. There is one thing that they all have in common, which is cybersecurity risk, which is why everybody is here today to listen and talk about it. And it continues to be among the top concerns for companies, their executive directors, their boards. Regulators have begun an increased scrutiny and focus on cybersecurity. We have seen some news recently of senior leaders within organizations to be held personally liable for cybersecurity incidents, which is a concern, I think, to most companies. During this panel, we're going to delve into three key areas of cybersecurity risk: maintaining a reasonable risk-focused cybersecurity program. So actually putting together the actual security measures that will protect data, responding to identified threats and vulnerabilities, and then reporting cybersecurity incidents. Those are three broad categories, and we're going to try to touch on the most important and key aspects of those areas. Our three topics today. As I said before, the experts on this panel have years of experience helping their own and other companies to prepare for and respond to changes in what is now an ever-changing landscape from a regulatory perspective, from a threat perspective. And so they're going to be sharing with us what they have seen, what they have done, and most importantly, I think what their practical on the ground advice and support is for companies. So with that, I'd like to turn the topic to maintaining a reasonable and risk-focused cybersecurity program. So first question is actually for Mike. So Mike's companies like Meta that are working to build and maintain a reasonable and compliant cybersecurity program complex ecosystem. They conduct periodic risk assessments to help them, assess the risk around cybersecurity, identify areas of strength, and identify areas of improvement, areas for mitigation. But they can be really expensive depending on the entity size and complexity. And as I mentioned, we're with Meta, so there are fewer companies that have the size and complexity of Meta. And sometimes executive leadership can be resistant to conducting them where needed and when needed. So what sorts of legal and regulatory concerns should we be aware of that can be leveraged to help get leadership really focused on these risk assessments and appreciate the importance of conducting?
Thanks. Everybody can hear me. Just a level set, some tech jargon here. I'm not actually speaking on behalf of another I wrote here, so if there are any journalists stuck into the back door, please turn off the tape recorder. I think first and foremost, risk assessments are undoubtedly incredibly important. Every business, every company should be doing one. And the reality is it comes down to money. I'm not just talking about regulatory fines for poor security posture and breach, but also just regulatory penalties in terms of being able to operate. I spoke with some folks about cryptocurrency exchanges. Absolutely, just for example, absolutely Coinbase, and Abra, things like that. Imagine having a sufficiently poor security posture in the wake of a breach and losing your money transfer license. You're no longer allowed to operate in a specific jurisdiction. That's a huge concern, and also has to do with money. But you mentioned they can be costly. They absolutely can, and conducting a risk assessment can be upwards of $100, $200, $500,000 depending on how much the size and complexity of your company. Should we still conduct one? I'd suggest that you absolutely should, because the regulatory fines for not doing one very well might have a few zeros tacked onto that. But does conducting a risk assessment really have any regulatory impact? Like, do regulators really care whether you conducted a risk assessment? And definitely. Some regulators care explicitly, like New York Department of Financial Services. We spoke about that earlier. 23 New York CRR 500.12 actually requires a risk assessment designed to sufficiently inform your cybersecurity program. Other ones, Health and Human Services, via HIPAA, security rule also requires a risk assessment. And there are other regulators that do so implicitly as well. Take the WCCW, the European Electronic Communications Code. There's a test for whether a security incident has happened. Specifically, any event with an actual adverse effect on ability to resist, given confidence level, ... Any action that could compromise the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. But how do you know whether you're actually resistant to any effect? Have you done a security assessment to know where your servers are physically and logically, who your threat actors are, what your latent vulnerabilities are, what your security controls are, how they work, where your data is, where it flows? Without that, it's a little disingenuous to say that you're confident that you can resist any action. So, from a regulatory perspective, even if it's not baked in directly to a regulation like EECC, for example, I strongly advise clients to conduct one. And in addition to that, I don't want to take up too much time on this question. How do you conduct one? Is it just, are there standards? Is there some sort of rubric? There are things like security scorecards, which is kind of like a stoplight, red, yellow, green, not sufficient. It's helpful to get an understanding of where your risks are, but the big regulators, the big dogs in the room, they're looking at things like NIST, they're looking at things like ISO, and they want to make sure that you're actually doing your homework and all those bits that I just mentioned: data flows, data points, where the data lives, how it works, and assessing those common attack vectors, whether you're actually being reasonable and appropriate in terms of the types of safeguards you're implementing. You're not really going to be doing your homework unless you're adopting stuff like NIST SP 800-30, not to throw around publications, but it's the guide for conducting risk assessments. And most of the people here don't have to comply with that, but we do have some government folks in here, and you know that you do. And so even though, just for example, companies like Meta, Coinbase, all the companies out there, we don't have to comply with that, but it's helpful to draw upon publications like that. So just to kind of wrap up and close up, if you're not conducting a risk assessment, it could have devastating impact, not just financially, but loss of goodwill in the community. Nobody wants to hear that you're not taking security and risk analysis seriously.
Thanks, Mike. I think that was a really good and thorough answer, and a little bit scary. And I will add one thing to it, which is that from a holistic perspective, I would say that risk assessments are really important to understand your risks, right? So if you're not conducting a risk assessment, if you're not understanding where the vulnerabilities are in your program, where the weaknesses are in your program, you are going to be unable to fully protect the data that you have. And so, putting aside the regulatory requirements, putting aside any kind of legal requirements from a purely cybersecurity perspective, without having that review on a regular basis, where are your weak points? Where are the things that you need to focus your resources in order to protect your assets? You're not going to be able to do that effectively. Speaking of things that companies don't always do, even though they should, David, we often tell clients that to really understand risks to data, it is important to do a data mapping or otherwise identify where their critical data is stored and have access to it. From your perspective, what are some of the risks of not fully understanding what corporate data exists on each system?
Thank you. I think probably the number one thing that we see is the most concerning are data sources that the company doesn't even know exist. This has compounded thanks to COVID and work from home, and I've even had a client call it, infrastructure. It's not even corporate infrastructure anymore. It's bring your own infrastructure. So people have started to use systems. So it's, you think that you have your map. Okay, we have email, we have these systems, we have these financial systems, we have these database systems. There's a whole plethora of other information out there that I don't think corporations even know exist. We find out about these many times from investigations that we're performing, where we're trying to understand, well, where's the data, who did what, and then that's where we learn about a lot of things. And I don't think the companies have taken into consideration this as far as data security is concerned. And think about it from cyber risk, but every other kind of risk, really, for that matter. Understanding what information do we have and where all is that information stored at. There are so many systems out there that are not a document either, so they're really hard to understand. I don't like to name products, but a lot of the chat products that are out there now that are being used quite a bit within the market, that information is not very friendly to be able to search and understand what is happening within the information. So if it did get exposed, what was exposed? So a lot of our clients, I think, struggle with that and don't have an appreciation for when that information is exposed, what the true risk of that information truly is. As an example, I have seen in the past, I used to be a programmer. I know that how a lot of this stuff works depends on the organization greatly as far as what the security policies are. I'm pretty sure Meta locks everything down, that's tight, but I've seen a lot of organizations where a developer might be working on a system, they take a portion of the client database to test it offline. Not everybody has great data hygiene around that. So we'll find that that machine might get compromised and it has the entire database on that machine when it shouldn't have it in the first place. So the database is secure, we have all these rules in place and everything else to protect that information, but one laptop could have the entire database on it and it may not even know that it's there. So there's those kinds of risks that really keep me up at night, thinking about how much true risk is hidden behind that information that we're not aware it's even there.
I think also kind of scary answer. So, but I know the truth is that, many of us work with a lot of different clients. We've seen kind of the full array of maturity with regard to understanding your data assets, and who has access to it, and what you're doing with it. And one thing I wanted to add here too, again, is from the holistic idea that if you don't know where your data is, there are inefficiencies that you will create within your organization and redundancies, and that can be really costly depending on the cost of data storage and that kind of thing. It also makes it really hard to understand the value of your data and how to monetize it. And so the benefits of really understanding what for many companies is one of their biggest assets, really understanding the value, the volume, the type of data, the integrity of the data, really understanding that is really important from a cybersecurity perspective. It's also really important from a business perspective. And so when we talk to clients about data mapping, we go, well, we don't have the money for that. I mean, the truth is, do you really want to say that you have the money to understand the value of this the full data, which is one of your biggest assets? So thank you for that, David. I want to switch a little bit towards talking about international compliance risks, and I say international because we're in the United States right now, and in Japan, not international, but Takeshi, international companies face significant compliance risks as they attempt to navigate this patchwork of laws and regulations, and they can vary widely by region and country. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody here. Among those risks is understanding and appropriately complying cross-border data transfer restrictions. And that's really, that's really top of mind in the EU, but you need to really focus on the fact that lots of countries, including Japan, have these restrictions, and potential issues related to government access to foreign data, which is also another topic that is really top of mind. And of course, with the United States, with President Biden's executive order recently with regard to government access to data in the United States, it's a really hot topic right now. So Takeshi, regarding that explanation that business operators should understand the risk of so-called government access in the context of cross-border data transfer restrictions under Japanese law, what would be a practical response of Japanese corporations to really understand and address that?
Thank you for the question. And let me first explain the framework of Japanese protection laws and regulations, because it's a unique legislation for the US. First thing I have to talk about the framework, and then including the issue of government access, and also a practical response of this. Firstly, many corporations transfer data globally, as you mentioned, and such as by sharing data with group companies and forcing the processing personal data, and even storing data in a server located in other jurisdictions. And in this regard, regulations cross-border data transfer shall apply. And although GDPR is in the US is famous for its cross-border data transfer restriction, the Japanese data protection law also has a separation in their regulations. And under Japanese law, for the transfer to the UK or the EEA countries, obtaining consent of data subject or establishing a system to ensure the same level of protection measures is required. Such protection measure is meant by including a certain contract like the USCCs and in the Japanese context, and for obtaining a CDPR certification. And as for such requirement, Japanese data protection laws and regulations, including the guidelines, were recently amended on April this year. And Japanese corporations are required to understand the legal system for the protection of personal information in foreign countries, not only Japanese law, but also in the foreign countries. And such understanding of the legal system includes the existence or non-existence of a system that imposes an obligation on this operator to cooperate with government activities to request for information that is called government access, and that may have a significant impact on its rights and interests of individuals. So usually governments conduct investigations and collect information for businesses, for criminal investigation, or protect national security. It is the usual activities, but if there is a case where there is a kind of infringement of individual rights and interests, that may be a problematic under Japanese law. So such government acts should be understood by the business corporation, and the corporation should know about the system by collecting information. But practically speaking, it is impossible for Japanese corporations by themselves to collect such information. And in this regard, Japanese government, the government charges the personal information protection commission, that is PPC, where I worked for 2 years. So the commission provides information regarding the government acts in foreign countries in websites for about 40 jurisdictions, including the US, China, or other countries. And according to the information provided commission, the US doesn't have government access system that has a significant impact on rights and individuals, rights and interests of individuals. But on the other hand, China, Russia, and even Singapore has kind of such a system that imposes huge impact on rights and interests of individuals. And in this regard, in theory, Japanese corporations have to use some additional measures to protect rights and interests of individuals. But practically speaking, in context of the transfer from the EEA or EU, it is impossible for take such additional measures. Those if the government collect information from business operators, and business operators cannot refuse to submit their information to governments. So the law imposes obligation for business operators to submit information to government. So in that sense, Japanese corporations react to such regulations in a way that they see information provided by the information provided by the commission, but they just see information, not the commission measures so far. But such tendency might be changed in the future. So there is a recent scandal regarding the government act context in Japan. For example, there is a major message app in Japan which collects personal information for Japanese users, and but actually the users' information was backed by Chinese outsourced company. In fact, the fact that such information can be accessed by Chinese corporations was not go to the public. So the public expect that the data collected by the messaging app will in Japan, but actually accessed by China. And it was codified by public, and as a result of this scandal, there's a tendency that companies are more caring about how to store data in Japan or in foreign countries based on the sensitivity or importance of data. I mean that if the messaging data is to foreign governments might be a risk for it. In that sense, such kind of data should be stored in Japan, and there would not be subject to the government access by foreign public authority. So that is the point in regard to cybersecurity. So that's the recent tendency in Japan.
Thank you. I know we all appreciate hearing two things. One, your expertise was with regard to Japanese cross-border data transfers, because a lot has really happened in Japan over the last few years around data protection, and it's still, I don't think, fully, well understood by those of us who are practicing in the national state. And the other piece is, hearing about the scandal that you said about the Chinese access to Japanese data. I will say that in the US, that's, one of the concerns that we have about doing business with Chinese companies, and the potential that the Chinese government can have access to that data. So it's an ongoing threat that I think we all appreciate hearing about. Speaking about global companies and dealing with international rules, Ashton, global companies also have the unique challenge of determining how and when to report cyber incidents that occur in multiple jurisdictions or on a global level. I know that a number of us up here on the panel have been engaged in incidents that span across country borders, and it can be a really complex exercise to figure out when and where to report things. With the rapid development of cybersecurity safeguarding and reporting requirements around the world, how do global businesses ensure proactive compliance with the requirements and respond appropriately when an incident occurs? And I'm giving you that question. It probably, you can write a book about it. Maybe you can give 5 minutes of overview.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe even less than 5. So first, I have to thank you, Jacqueline. I did not appreciate how great your organization was until I heard our fellow panelists, how it all just weaves together with that question. So you kind of made this very easy for me. Thank you. So, the patchwork that we've heard about of the laws, within one single jurisdiction, let alone globally, do prove to be a bit difficult for organizations to get their arms around during a crisis. So certainly, working my way backwards, as I think about what we just heard, you just think about, the rules in Japan, as we just heard, data transfers might require consents and an understanding of local law of the receiving country. Well, if you don't know that, then you probably can't map your data. If you can't map your data, then how are you going to do an effective risk assessment? So this all really works well together. Thank you. But what we have found for clients is that those who do truly prepare ahead of the time, who do risk assessments to figure out where their core systems are, the core types of data that require certain protections and safeguards, or that may trigger notification obligations for key jurisdictions that they operate in, who do those types of risk assessments, who conduct data mapping to know exactly which server, which cloud instances have the data that's regulated that would trigger those obligations. And that spend the time and effort, and it's not necessarily a small amount of time and a little bit of effort, really developing a good understanding of the local laws that would be most applicable to them. When the crisis occurs, it is incredibly difficult to do that at the timeframes that are required. I mean, 2018, when GDPR was fully in effect, most organizations found 72 hours very difficult to respond to, but now it's sort of a global standard that's developing. But now in the critical infrastructure space, we're starting to see 24-hour notification requirements that are actually going to be enforced. So that's just not the United States, it's overseas. It's sort of the new standard that's developing. If you think about how much information could you possibly know within 24 hours, really spending and having the investment up front to do everything we've already been talking about will put you in a very good position. So when the crisis happens, cybersecurity incident, unauthorized access to data, an insider who takes the data and does, impermissible uses of the data, whatever it is that can trigger an obligation, knowing those up front and having an integrated system would help organizations be able to make those key decisions within the first 24 to 72 hours. That's very easy for me and the rest of the panelists to say this all day, except for maybe one who actually is in industry. But and that's not a specific comment about your company, of course. But I know it's very easy to say, but it really does get back to that type of investment and partnership between the IT team, the legal and compliance teams to integrate together will be dividends and save a lot of money on the back.
So that was an excellent less than 5-minute overview. So thank you, Ashton, for that. And I actually think that leads nicely into our next area, which is, when we're talking about reporting in multiple places, we're really talking about incidents that first the company would have to identify and think about and hopefully be able to triage quickly in order to make some of these really short notification deadlines. What we've seen recently, of course, is that we don't really always know what the threats are. We can be surprised by them, especially new and novel and complex threats that are popping up from cyber attackers all over the world. So Yuichi, as a cybersecurity consultant, you and your company often are the first to learn about new and novel complex cybersecurity vulnerabilities and trends. Or helping your clients to react to them. What's the trend of the latest cyber incidents in Japan that we should all be thinking about?
Thank you. We handle, as a PwC, we handle many of those incidents, either cyber or not, maybe like a potential cyber attacks. And as a comparison, I bring up the statistics from 2017 and 2022. And there's a interesting change in the trend that I can observe here. So top 1 and 2 incidents are triggered by the targeted attack, like phishing, scare phishing type of attacks, and the ransomware. So back in 2017, the top of the list is the targeted attack, and the top 2 is the ransomware attack. But in 2022, this year or the last year, that it becomes the ransomware attack becomes the top, and the targeted attack becomes number 2. But this number 3 and 4 has becomes different in this 5-year period, especially after this pandemic. So back in 2017, number 3 is the incident that which basically ransomware attack, the target attack, but the information leak, which is basically triggered by internal employees. So those times the motivation of the leak was made by those employees who switched the job. They want to take the data with them. And I guess in the speech morning, there was an example of the data leaked by the Bears. That was a recent news, and that happened a lot, even back then, and that happened a lot here now. But in 2002, this is the I guess trend that those who suffer financial loss, the motivation is becomes more targeted to I guess making more money by selling the information. So motivation shifted from just taking the data with them when they switch the job, or the back then I did also a lot of investigation, which basically against the employees who are not very happy with the company. It's basically disgruntled employees deliberately leak the information to the competitors just because they damage the company. There are such a lot of those incidents back then, but in recent years, especially during the pandemic, the motivation becomes they try to make money by selling the information. So those are the I guess the one notable change in the trend.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate hearing kind of the shift, and I think, you know, when you put it like that, it really has become apparent the way that we have shifted, globally in cybersecurity. Phishing and spear phishing, however, has remained kind of a top issue for decades, really. And it's interesting because we kind of all know what phishing and spear phishing is, and companies know, and we try to guard against it, but it still happens. And so it's interesting that threat actors are still finding new and novel ways to get credentials, to get into systems specifically into that. And then the other thing is the supply chain. I think we were all sufficiently scared by the solar wings a couple of years ago, and not only the widespread effect of that, but then also the SEC scrutiny of it. And so really being aware of these top trends can help with risk assessment and also your preparations for how you can respond to these things in the future. I wondered, Chief, you gave an overview of some of the recent trends, but is there anything specific, any cybersecurity events that you could potentially share with us that would be a good case study into these things?
Okay, so I would say one of the cases that those internal risks, internal employees leaking information or taking information to gain the financial benefit by selling it. So there are a couple interesting cases that I can make a note of that. So these cases are basically from the surface, it looks like it's an external attack. It comes from the outside, but it was basically done by the only employee, internal employee. But the thing was that they learned, they're not cyber experts, they're not the professional hackers, but they learn how to do it from the internet, like YouTube or the website. And then they basically make it look like external attack. And then they successfully took the data and essentially gain money by selling it. But the thing is that those incidents didn't happen in the past, but it's just a recent thing that we're very shocked that those motivation I explained about the motivation of leaking information back in the day was more like to cause damage to the company. But now those threat actors inside is basically trying to make it look like an external attack, but it's actually the threat resides inside the company. So that's one of the probably interesting case example that happens in recent years.
That is a good example, and also one that I think probably a lot of companies don't really think about. Everybody thinks about the external attacker, it's somebody outside the organization trying to come in. So it is really important for companies to focus on insider threat and to look internally when you have an event to make sure that it's not something that's happening within the company. Always looking outside the company, potentially could lead you to miss, a critical piece of evidence. So thank you for that. Mike, speaking of specific examples, we are not going to talk about Meta. However, and Luigi mentioned, and I think the thing that is always at the top of mind when we talk about cybersecurity risks is ransomware. From a legal and regulatory perspective, how should we be approaching ransomware attacks and thinking about ransomware preparedness? And what do we need to be looking out for?
Thanks, Jackie. I think the first and foremost important question in ransomware is like, what are the ransomware do? I think not just internally, these practitioners, but also the regulators need to watch out for. It's like this knee-jerk reaction that you get infected by ransomware. It's just stop after. And maybe that's true, but maybe it's not. And I think we need, it's not just legal, advisors, but like solution providers. Not to voice another cliche here, but we need to bring a certain level of like technical knowledge. The reason that I say that is let's back up and just ask like what is ransomware, how does it work? Ransomware comes in a number of things. Sometimes it's, hey, we have your data, give us some Bitcoin. Sometimes it's, hey, we've encrypted your data, give us some Bitcoin. Or sometimes it's, we have your data and we also encrypted it, give us a lot of it. Why do I say that? The reason is, I think we need to pay attention to what is happening in our systems. Where are our servers? Is there a DMZ preventing direct internet access? DMZ people network topologies to say that you don't want our important data being internet based, and makes it easier to access, makes it easier to exploit, and it's not good security practice. So let's hide it behind another layer. And from an investigation perspective, I want to address preparedness before we get there to talk about preparedness. How does ransomware work? Bad actor gets into your system, traverses the network, the server that contains juicy bit of data, and then they're either gonna drop some sort of piece of malware that attaches itself on some process and encrypts some stuff. That's that's not ideal. That's very bad. But it's aside, data exfiltration is usually what regulators concerned. Especially let's look at I mentioned AK test. Let's look at HIPAA. OCR's dropped guidance in the past 3 years, but you get hit with ransomware, it's the fact of breach because they're concerned about unauthorized disclosure of PHI. But going back, going in circles here, bringing technical expertise to the table, we need to be able to talk to our information security experts that are operating our SOC, our internal detection groups, network security engineers, SIP admins, the folks that are actually at the firewall. You can ask them, hey, you need to look at firewall egress traffic loss. You need to look at HTTP server file loss. You need to look at FTP server file loss. I need to know exactly what happened on the system that was breached. Were files manipulated? Were files actually accessed? Did files move? Or, even go a step further, reverse engineer the malware. What actually happens in that code? Is data just being encrypted, or is it actually being read? Because there is a difference. And oftentimes that difference is no further questions from this regulator, have a nice day, and, you know, $100 million fine for OCR and end up on their remote data, their big website. So, you know, number one, focus on what the ransomware actually is. Don't just jump to the conclusion that it's a breach. It's very well might not. Preparation, another regulatory. OCR is all of it's healthcare, it's even something like that. First question that Office of Civil Rights for Health and Human Services will ask you during an investigation: conduct a risk assessment. So if you haven't conducted a risk assessment, you're not in a good place. You're not doing your best. And I'm not saying that risk assessments are this, you know, get out of jail free card, panacea for security. It's just if you're not looking at where the different avenues that ransomware can happen, they're not going to take you seriously. What you've done to try to prevent it, regardless of whether you actually have it or not, is not sufficient. So going back to risk assessment is response after it happens. Again, you really need to do the technical analysis, and I'm not saying you need this to plant information security professionals, hackers. I'm not saying that. All I'm suggesting is that in the cybersecurity and data privacy context, we need to bring enough to the table where we know who we're bringing into the room and the types of questions to ask, because the people who are the experts are not legal. They don't know what OCR is going to be interested or what MRPFS is going to be interested in. So we need to help guide that conversation by asking the right kinds of questions to put together a realistic and believable narrative that what happened wasn't. And if it was, we did everything reasonable and appropriate to prevent it. Because, you know, Jackie said, like, oh, it's scary stuff. It is scary stuff. But scarier is not being prepared for, not understanding it, not knowing what you need to do front and doing your own. So, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. You know, in short, it's not, unfortunately, it's not a question of whether and if you're going to get hacked. It's a question of when. And do your homework, like we've all been saying, put your best foot forward. Your incident response processes are going to take off. You're going to be able to get those quick 24-hour, 72-hour notices to whoever you need to do it by, and hopefully you can put together a real narrative that people and it makes sense. Because saying, "Oh, well, it's ransomware," and didn't know, didn't know where data was, because you didn't have an app, you didn't do it. It's not good. So hopefully that helps. That's also going to move the needle with senior leadership in terms of success.
Hi. So thank you for that, and I feel like I'm gonna need a recording of this, so can I done all of the stuff that you just said? Because I was from a technical cybersecurity perspective, really good outline of like, here's what you need to sit down and look at the minute that you can firing somewhere. I wonder, Ashton, can I insert a question here that we hadn't prepared you for? Sorry, but I think one of the things that probably people here and also seniors here, the question that always comes up when we talk about ransomware, we talk about ransom demands, is do we pay? And so I would like you to touch on that, right? Okay, so potentially you're in a situation, you have ransomware, it's the data is maybe not recoverable, or it would be incredibly expensive to recover it, or it would take a long time, your services would be down. Whatever the situation is, considering potentially paying ransom, what are some of the legal considerations we should think about?
You're just okay. No, thanks. Great question. Yes, hi. Unfortunately, so United States, there's no general prohibition about paying a ransom unless you are a co-conspirator with the criminal who is extorting an entity. However, for if you're paying a sanctioned or blocked party or a terrorist organization or standing law that prohibits such a transaction from occurring. And of course, every country, every jurisdiction, national jurisdiction has their own requirements. In certain countries, it is prohibited to be a criminal act. So going back to the original question I was asked about, how do you know your requirements? How do you understand the patchwork of laws? This is one particular area where a few years ago, frankly, I was advising clients thinking ransomware would sort of dwindle over time, and the statistics you gave would not have occurred. I had said, why invest in the effort to understand all of the different jurisdictions and whether you pay a ransom because it's like an unnecessary path. But unfortunately, ransomware is not going anywhere, and the threat actors keep getting more sophisticated. So it's just really important to understand what your obligations are and what the prohibitions are. So doing the diligence around the threat actor, what you know, and typically you know very little about the bad guy, the criminal who is intruded upon your network or the network. But doing the diligence, many times hiring an expert negotiating firm, they can do due diligence for you. They can provide you an attestation that can go into records, say we have no reason to believe this threat actor is a block sanctioned or terrorist organization. And then they can also be the professionals who help effectuate negotiations on the settlement. The other thing that is commonly asked or perhaps misunderstood is that engaging a threat actor does not necessarily mean paying a threat actor. There could be very good business reasons to engage a threat actor in a fruitful discussion. Of course, they think you're going to pay them, but that's a decision that could be delayed. Also, sometimes engaging and not paying could have detrimental effects. But all of those types of risks, even micro risk assessments, can be very helpful in engaging in these types of discussions, especially when critical systems aren't available, no way to get access to them in a timely manner, or critical data is available and it's not available.
Thank you. I think that's actually a really helpful piece of information to have is that not all threat actors are created equal, and there are definitely third parties who can come in and kind of help you figure it out, and that's usually advisable when you're in this kind of situation. Speaking of which, I want to go back to Mike for a minute. When we prepared for this panel, you talked about bug bounty and how they've been a hot topic lately. Hoping you can share with everybody exactly what those are, what that means. And also, if you have a good internal security and engineering team who conducted appropriate risk assessment, why don't you need one? And it's kind of risky to get that kind of information from unknown third parties.
Great question. So first and foremost, I think you asked to define bug bounty. So that's also a good question. It's not very commonly known outside of the security and tech industries. Basically, what it is in short is you basically just having third parties. You could be a third party researcher and test the security of the food product. Actually, but
Definitely not.
So entirely third party external researchers, maybe you're a student or you have a full-time job, it's just a hobby, and you are engaging in good faith security research companies, maybe website or app, or maybe a piece of hardware that they manufacture. And you look for vulnerabilities and you find them, wrap it up in a report, submit it to the company, and the company will take a look at it, triage for security impact, and they'll maybe pay you you look at Apple's website, I can give you some context of some of these payouts. For remote code execution, basically just hacking into a device and being able to do whatever you want with it. They'll pay upwards of $1 billion. And for certain types of hacks, you get a 50% bonus. So $1.5 billion. Granted, there's probably tens of people on the planet that can pull that off, but it's pretty cool to think about. Why is it important to have one when you have good internal security? Why invite a bunch of random people who don't know to test your environment? Like I said, it's a great question, but I think I have a good answer to it. You can categorize hackers into three groups generally: black hats, white hats, and gray hats. Black hats are bad guys, that hopefully are going to jail for what they're doing. You have the white hats who are good security researchers. They just want to make products in the world, and the internet, a better place. And then you have gray hats who you don't really know what they want to do. Political reasons, for the highest bidder. So you just don't know. For purposes of bug bounty program, where we're fighting people to test us, you can take black hat hackers off the table, because black hats are going to do what black hats do, regardless of whether you give them an email invite or not. Gray hats, you can also take them off the table because they're unpredictable. The key group that we're interested in are the people that are going to help, and the people that are going to be engaged in good faith security research, the white hats. So why overtly invite them? Because they're good researchers. They're not going to try to hack you unless you invite them to do that. So why is it good to have a program? Well, depending on where you work, depending on your platform, your product, your app, your website, what have you, you could be looking at millions, maybe even millions of lines of code. Like I can't even imagine how many lines of code are inside Tesla, but probably a lot. And multiplying exponentially your security footprint by inviting these white hat hackers and say, hey, this, Tesla's in scope. I think Tesla's in scope. If you can find a vulnerability, go for it, and it will down for it. So you've now taken your internal security team and also added a whole massive group of external researchers that you'll pay on a one-off basis. You don't even have to hire them. You have to give them help there, et cetera. Jokes aside, the point is you're massively increasing. You're getting more eyeballs on code. We're all legal professionals here for the most part. Who here has looked at a 50-page motion for summary judgment and missed a comma and submitted it? Imagine if missing that comma meant you automatically lost the motion. That's kind of like how code works. Missing a semicolon or a comma or whatnot, that's devastating. And sometimes when you've been working on a project for years, maybe even decades, and just looking at the same millions of lines of code over and over again, like looking at a motion again, it just kind of glosses over you. Really good to get fresh eyeballs. So that's one thing, having some research. But the other part is it's from a regulatory perspective, it builds goodwill. Nobody likes a company that hides their security issues, that hides them. The security community, most part, the regulatory community, likes to see embracing a security first culture, defense in depth, having multiple layers of security. And if you can demonstrate that you are okay with vulnerabilities, you don't like them, you don't want to make them in, but we're doing everything we can to find them quickly, fix them, and do so before bad actors can, who will actually exploit your systems and steal data and a whole bunch of other bad stuff. We're on board with that. So I think those are the two biggest reasons, extra people with their eyes on code and embracing a security first culture. That's why you need a bug bounty program.
Okay, I think that's just, I don't think I ever really described talking about you before, but I'm on board and also I'm going to tell my kids, we want to go into background. I didn't realize that the payouts would be the thing. So as we close out this topic, actually, I want to turn it back to you. We talked about preparedness for ransomware and the types of attacks and different companies. Is there anything else from kind of a general perspective for preparing for ransomware or other types of attacks? And what are some proactive global steps that global businesses can take to improve their ability to respond to cyber incidents in a manner that reduces risk?
Yeah, thank you. I know we're coming through on time, so I'll be very brief. I think first and foremost, we're rehearsing on how to respond to the cyber incident in we call tabletop exercises. So really having a playbook, having a plan on how you react to a cyber incident, whether it's ransomware or any other, especially those that can have a crippling effect on an organization, is a very practical, it's a very useful exercise to undertake. It can be a simple exercise with simulation, it can be highly complex, but at the end of the day, we're practicing, then we're at least aware of how we're going to respond and any type of improvements we need in our own process. The only other I'll share at this point is having discipline and communication is key. It's true for any investigation. This is a white collar conference. Any investigation, having discipline within the organization, how you communicate internally and externally. And we have found over and over again for cybersecurity incidents, this is critical because what we know today, the incident begins, is rarely how it will end. And if we miscommunicate, it typically exacerbates the impact.
Thanks for that, Ashton. So since we are coming close on time, I want to cover our last topic quickly and actually to the panel I'm going to flip to who I'm going to ask the next question to. So everything else aside, something happens to your company, it's a cybersecurity incident, it affects personal data, or it's otherwise material to the effect that you have to actually report it to a regulatory agency. How does that work operationally? How should we as companies be tackling that? And so I'm going to turn to Kashi first. There's a requirement under Japanese law to promptly notify affected individuals about a security incident. What kind of factors should we be thinking about regarding the timing and the method of those notifications in Japan? And then after you chat about it, David, I want to close out with you, if you wouldn't mind, and just talk about, generally what are the major challenges for, figuring out who to notify and when.
First of all, I want to point out the legal application of the Japanese law regarding the breach notification. And if there is a data breach that likely to harm an individual private interest, it will trigger the notification requirement to the commission and also individual. And has been interpreted is likely to harm an individual private interest and based on a relevant regulation. For example, based on sensitivity of data or a number of individuals. However, in the context of cybersecurity, it will automatically trigger the requirement, so it has a wrongful purpose, and so that kind of data breach will automatically trigger the notifications to the issue and for individuals. So the timing is very important for how to respond to the occurrence of data breach or corporation. First of all, regarding the notification to cyber authority, it is 3 to 5 days, and the timing is defined and relevant regulation. At the one hand, for the notification to affect individuals, there is no clear guidance. And that's just says that it should be promptly reported to relevant individuals. In practice, it takes time to conduct right investigation to identify affected data or root cause or have to conduct corrective measures. It will take time to conduct notifications to individuals. In this regard, there is the explanation in the development guidelines and mission. It says that it is difficult to conduct notification properly, such as a case where if there is no clear rule or no much facts are clarified at this stage, it can be delayed for the reasonable purpose. So even though it is not clear guidance according to the guidelines, but based on this guideline, we usually advise flexibly to interpret this practically.
That's helpful that those terms like promptly and without undue delay always give me heartburn. I know exactly what that means, but it was just, okay. So, would you mind closing us out?
Sure. And in those words, always, this is my first question is define that. We were talking earlier, it's define what often is define what time is. What does that mean? But one of the challenges that we see is you got ransomware and non-ransomware types of breaches that occur. Ransomware has a whole other layer on the things. There's obviously in cyber how we can make a thing that are not carried to the information that or so what the data is. But ultimately you're trying to understand what information has been exposed. A lot of times you go through a proof of life exercise, you have other things. So is it actually our data, what's in the data? I go back to the earlier points that I was making on understanding what data you have, because many of our clients get an appreciation for what has been exposed. And once they find out, oh, it's just this information on we don't have anything personal in there. And then sure enough, when we get to the data, there's a massive spreadsheet with 40,000 social security numbers in it or something. And I've seen it time and time again. We're trying to really understand what that data is. We've even seen it where the top half of the spreadsheet, the first 20,000 rows or whatever, will contain one kind of PII, and then you get down further into the spreadsheet and find entirely different type of PII or PHI or we have no idea how these things have been created with an organization. For a lot of times, when we get before it's someone doing something they're checking or doing a document system under their computer and getting these different types of exports. But the big challenge then comes, unfortunately, we're trying to figure out, well, is data meadows the same as data meadows? And there's two data meadows, and what's the social security numbers matching all of this stuff up. So the beginning part of the picture is figuring out, well, this is kind of how big the haystack is only about 25% of the problem. The other 75% of the problem is trying to get through and normalize all that information in technical terms, where we're matching up who all the people are and who all people that we notify and who we notify them about. Now, as a good example, one of the challenges that we face is going back to spreadsheets because there are nemesis in the space. Spreadsheets and PDFs. You can pretty much chop everything else out because it's crazy to understand. But really, when you have a breach, the first thing you're looking at is spreadsheets and PDFs to understand what's in those. And so many times the spreadsheets, it's not a sheet, it's a workbook with 10, 20, 30 sheets in it. And trying to go through those to figure out what is in that spreadsheet and where is the potential PII, PHI, or even business information that we don't want out there can be very challenging. So we've been working on some ways to be able to split workbooks and individual sheets that we're only evaluating sheets that may potentially contain PII, and helps Steve talk about breaking because there's so much time spent trying to get through massive spreadsheets and understand what's in them.
Thank you for that. And to add insult to injury, once we figure all of that out, we need to know where the people are, because then Every country has their own local government. In the United States, there's 50 different rules, which is super fun. Super law. It become very interesting, and it's constantly changing. So I think that closing out our session, we gave you a lot of information. I don't know if there's time for questions, but I think we'd all be happy to take them. And if you have any, or speak after. Oh, there's one person there. So I was going to say, we did such a good job. Nobody has.
Well, there's always sort of questions. I guess the one thing I don't think anyone's really talked about is this kind of vendor slash, customer vendor management issue, right? And I feel like that's a big area of the cybersecurity thing, probably for Mike that in there. I guess it's sort of an ambiguous question, but any kind of thoughts from the panel on that area?
Oh, I'm sure we all have thoughts, but I want to make sure that we understand the question. Do you mean with regard to like supply chain attacks? Anybody want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I guess thoughts. And I do want to keep it short as I want to start this time. I think first and foremost, risk assessments. Seriously, and the reason that I say that is because, company A, the parent company who's controlling the relationship, they're great, they're doing their risk assessments, they have strong security posture, they know where their data is, blah, blah, blah. They're about to engage with a third party and hand over their data. And so if you don't know what that third party is doing or what their security posture is, you're really not, you're not being that smart about it. So maybe you're like, well, yeah, that's literally my question. What you can do, you can't like go audit a third party. Some third parties will like to do that. The reality is, especially if they're a big company, they're not going to like to do it, or they literally just don't have the bandwidth. Like, and so it's kind of up to you as that relationship holder, how deep you're willing to go. If you have a questionnaire, tell us about what kind of policies and procedures do you have? Do they address things like access control? Do they address things like business continuity and disaster recovery? Do you have ISO certification? Do you know what NIST is? Like these are the the starting pieces of determining whether you want to engage with that vendor. And you can take it a step further and require artifacts like, oh, you're telling us you have BitLocker on all of your books. Okay, well first, that for context, BitLocker is encryption on Windows for certain operating systems. Give us a screenshot. That's all we need. You show us a screenshot, we'll believe that. And does this apply to all of them? Show us something on your domain controller that shows that this encryption policy is being pushed out and enforced on every computer that you have at the company. So that's the next step. But at the end of the day, it's just making sure is the vendor the type of company that like you would want to acquire? Are they safe? Are they secure? And engaging in that due diligence when you're doing that deal is make or break. David, I don't know.
No, I was going to say a little quickly add that I've seen this a lot with my principal accounting friends that I know. And many times it's very simple vendor due diligence process, but it's not so simple. And I've seen it, corporations can have a very thorough process, yet we still find payments that are going out the door to vendors that are not approved vendors. How do they get on them? All these things. So that's just a piece of it. But then if you're actually shipping data out as well to somebody, much a lot of what Mike's touching on here, understanding like, what are they doing with the data? How are they accessing the data? What information? How are they securing it? It opens up so many cans of worms. It's not really funny. But I have seen and bigger company with more impact than we have on that right audit. And I've seen a lot of larger organizations now enforcing the right audit and enterprise audits on vendors to make sure they're actually doing things the way they should be done.
Yeah, I will add one thing to that, which is that the right to audit, the risk assessment, and also whose responsibility is it to notify customers, right? Who has the liability? It's all in the contract. That's really the key to making sure you're managing the risk around third-party cybersecurity, third-party responsibility for breaches is in that contract. That is by far the most important thing. We spend a lot of time negotiating contracts and making sure that it's clear. If there's a breach, who notifies the customer, right? Is it us? Is it our vendor? A lot of times you don't want the vendor being out there speaking for years, right? So, but figuring that out ahead of time, negotiating it as part of the contract is really key to managing that risk when something happens. So, well, I think that's right for us, but, you know, I'm sure afterwards, I mean, ask questions you want to ask us individually. Thank you all for